When George Garbis said goodbye to his 3-year-old son after his birthday party in November of 2017, there was no way he could have known it would be the last time he would see Jack alive. Jack was living with his mother and grandmother at the time of his death on New Year's Eve that year. He had been seeking custody of his child at the time of Jack's death, which further soured his relationship with the child's mother. Grieving and plagued by questions about the death of his only son, George, a military veteran, was stripped of his Second Amendment rights when his estranged wife was granted a temporary order of protection against him in the state of Florida. Florida's red flag law has been used more than 3,500 times since being enacted in March of 2018 in the wake of the Parkland shooting, according to the Associated Press. Often the law is used to confiscate firearms from a person who has made a threat to harm themselves or others. Enforcement varies by county, and the interpretation of what constitutes a threat can be subjective. George expects to regain custody of his firearms this year. He's writing a book about the tragic loss of his son and his experience with justice and the lack of it in the state of Florida. Has this experience given you a new perspective on the deterioration of our constitutional rights, George?
Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Bowne. It would seem that at this point, all of our rights and God-given freedoms have turned into privileges at this point. And while I was enlisted and serving in the military, I had a small inkling that maybe that type of behavior and overall societal norm would creep into the civilian world one day. And it's done exactly that now at this point. Right now, everything that we take for granted, that we think freedom of speech and our right to privacy, all of those things are becoming privileges. They are no longer necessarily rights anymore. And it's very hard to swallow that a veteran, a disabled veteran, could have his rights stripped from him purely based upon testimony and conjecture with no real hard evidence or facts, just discretionary power.
What was their main reason for confiscating your weapons?
The main reason was initially when I had told my estranged wife that I was going to seek full custody of my child, her knee-jerk reaction was to try and get a restraining order, which she was not granted, and the judge ruled in my favor in that instance. But it added and gave credence and precipice to the next iteration of legal proceedings where they took that first instance and kind of used it as a base to go off of. And after the worst had occurred, after my child had lost his life due to the negligence of his mother and grandmother, you could imagine I had some very colorful things to say, none of which were promises of bodily harm, injury, or anything else like that. It was more like a question of how could you fail on such a level and such a scale after you've been through the military and have professional watch-standing training? How could you drop the ball on such a level? So, I used some colorful
So she had
language.
been in the military as well?
Yes, she had been in for approximately 10 months and had a little bit less than $1 million of training, as to where I have between $1.5 to $2 million of training. And watch standing and attention to detail is so the center point of all of the training and the focal point of the mission. And to see a former service member, Navy or Marine Corps, just drop the ball like that, it has no precedence. Some people, when they get out of the service, they let everything go, all the training and everything. And I guess she ended up being one of those people, and she failed our only child.
Now that you're a couple of years into this, are you kind of looking around? Are you running into other people that are going through a similar situation in Florida?
Well, actually, believe it or not, no. The state of Florida has approximately 21 million people, 20 million on the books, probably 21 with illegal immigrants. No, believe it or not, it's an exceptionally rare thing. I imagine that these 3,500 cases and in excess of use of the red flag law is starting to pop up as a lot of red dots on the map. But me and those other people haven't necessarily rubbed elbows yet. And I think what's more shocking and amazing than anything isn't just how they suspended my Second Amendment rights, just like the McCloskeys, for instance, but that they let her off with absolutely zero charges. All of this red flag nonsense is built on the precipice or precedence of safety and the prevention of the loss of life. Well, those things have already come to pass, and what are we going to do about them now? Well, apparently, according to the 17th Circuit, nothing. Apparently, I am the larger threat than the person who's responsible for the death of a child. Now, no one died on my watch, right, yet I'm still the one being punished.
And you're in Fort Lauderdale, is that correct?
Approximately, yeah, might as well be. I go to the Fort Lauderdale courthouse, yes.
Is that a liberal area?
Very,
okay,
very. It's a blue
So
strong.
Anybody that supports the Constitution or is patriotic is automatically the enemy?
Virtually, yes. My neighbors on both sides are, they vote Democrat, they vote blue, and I can't engage them in any kind of political discourse because it devolves relatively quickly. Unfortunately, a lot of people that prescribe to the DNC and to communist viewpoints, honestly, in my opinion, are individuals who are probably a little stunted in the aptitude department.
Oh, yeah.
Because, when you serve, you really sacrifice a lot in regards to personal rights and freedoms, to health. I mean, you sacrifice your freedom so other people can maintain theirs. So when you take an oath to the Constitution and then you see the justice system throw the Constitution under the bus and treat it like it's some kind of obstacle, it's a godsmack. You don't know how to wrap your mind around these things. And unfortunately, after I got done serving and I rotated back to the civilian world, I learned that really all of it is a guise. It's a facade. Whether you're in the police force or you're in the military, it's like Alex often says, there is that good 10%, there's that good 1%, and then you got your rotten apples, which can sometimes be the majority of the individuals. And unfortunately, in our statutory and in our governmental agencies, I unfortunately feel like it's filled with a majority of yes men and people who are all too eager to circumvent and usurp other Americans' constitutional rights in order to turn a dollar. There are so many laws on the books that would keep people from Talib Rashad, AOC, any one of these ultra left-leaning people from being in the offices that they're in. But again, discretionary power is what's keeping these people from being swept up into the justice system and treated the way they deserve, just like how Ghislaine Maxwell was just totally free to go and do whatever she wanted across the globe until Bill Barr or our president went and relieved a particular politician, district attorney, whoever of power, and then boom, overnight, we have Miss Ghislaine Maxwell in custody. It's because of discretionary power. That is the way that all the yes men for the past 30 years probably have been setting up our government to wring out and exercise all the real good stalwart patriot Americans and replace them with people who will do absolutely whatever it is that they're told for that paycheck. It's wide, broad strokes of discretionary power with diffused, decentralized responsibility apparatuses. Military officers and judges can destroy your life with the stroke of a pen. And good people like you, me, anyone out there listening who tries to change the government and influence it in a positive way with pressure, that we were allocated through our Bill of Rights and through our Constitution were interpreted as white nationalists, white supremacists, or racists or totalitarians, when all we're trying to do is move the Overton window back to the middle of the room versus far off over to one side, where the good, kind, conservative people of this country have let it be dragged over to by what's essentially a bunch of children. And unfortunately, I have floated this thought to a lot of people, and the reality is, with the racial tension that we have going on in this country, with the left versus right kind of tension we have going on in this country, the sad fact of the matter is that I believe that obstinate children will continue to behave like obstinate children until we put our foot down. Now, that can be construed by whoever they want, however they want.
But it's inevitable. I mean,
it absolutely
anybody
is.
with any logic or any reason has to see what's happening. I mean, the latest video of the guy with cerebral palsy being ripped out of his car destroyed by this mob. They've just now put a statue up. They tore a statue down in England and replaced it with a BLM protester statue. One thing that really concerns me is you had mentioned the McCloskeys earlier and how their guns were confiscated just for protecting themselves, protecting their house after the mob had torn down their private fence, entered their property, and were saying they were going to burn the place down and kill the dog and all this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And they have on the books in Missouri, they have very strong castle doctrine laws. Yet this liberal Soros-funded, apparently 70% Soros-funded judge is just throwing the book at these two people. And so their guns get confiscated. They're protecting a historical home. This mansion they rebuilt was a piece of St. Louis history that they've restored. And they're trying to keep the American heritage alive. God forbid. And their guns are confiscated. Yet we've got, during the initial mob attacks of all the stores in New York City and all the other large cities, large Democrat cities, and I might even add strong cities, because that's where we're headed, is a strong cities network through the United Nations. Those guns that were stolen from pawn shops are now causing the murder rates to skyrocket. You've got these executions in broad daylight. You've got children being shot. You've got people being robbed. And I would say a portion of these guns that are now on the street were stolen. And yet they're confiscating purchased, legally operated guns from U.S. citizens. It's, as a member of the military, and I want to put a disclaimer here that what your answer is about to be is reason. This is not... They've led us to this situation. This is not about... This isn't about we're stronger than you and we're going to kick your ass and all. We've reached this point. Okay, so as a military member, and speaking for, probably other military members that you talk with, have you reached a red alert stage amongst the military when you look at the level of evil that this country is enduring?
Well, to be completely frank with you and to sum it up as easily as possible, all of the veterans that I know that are either politically neutral or are on our side of the aisle, we're all at what we would like to call ThreatCon Bravo. Okay, it's that last step before DEFCON 1 when all of the missile silo doors open.
Right.
Everyone I know who will remain nameless is completely stacked to the gills. We've had our ammunition for about 3 years now. We've had our food for about a year and a half, 2 years now. Everybody who I know who has half of an operating mind, people who aren't even necessarily former service members, but people who were just Eagle Scouts and whatnot and things like that, are absolutely taking this as seriously as possible. And we're basically just kind of standing on the sidelines and waiting for things to devolve the rest of the way, waiting for the police to basically throw their hands up in the air and say, how do you expect me to govern or contain something like this?
It seems like we're just. It seems like we're there already.
We virtually are.
Yeah,
It's
I'm seeing
circumstantial
videos of police being beaten up. That officer that was in a headlock, and they're all just, they're punching him in the face, and the mobs. Just saw a video recently of a mob at looked like a convenience store, and the mob won't leave. I mean, there's 10 police officers standing in front of this convenience store, and they just won't leave.
And if I may, the most despicable part about all of this is that when any of this gets to a courtroom, you have some kind of sadistic individual dressed in costume, sneering or scowling down at you, twisting and misinterpreting the law to make it fit their own narrative. And we all know this and we all see this. It's happened to me. It's happening to the McCloskeys. And it's probably happening to countless other Americans who have slightly less fortitude, who are just turning around on the inside, who don't know what to do with themselves. And it's about as un-American gets. These people want our country to devolve into a third world nation, so the only first world life that exists is inside of the gated communities that they live inside of and protect themselves with.
Well, I don't think people realize just how bad it's gotten. It's no longer a partisan issue. This is what the Democrats think, and this is what the Republicans think, and we're all in the middle trying to figure it out. It's far worse. We've been infiltrated by the Chinese and by the United Nations, and again, the Strong Cities Network. And on top of that, the Open Society Foundation, George Soros, just the other day, according to the New York Times, gave $220 million to organizations that support racial equality, especially for African Americans. George Soros has been kicked out of a number of countries for, infiltrating those countries, including his own home country. And now, with the McCloskeys, it's almost like a side note that judge is 70% funded by George Soros. And it's almost, we've reached this point where even to utter the name George Soros is anti-Semitic. Even though the guy has a history of having helped the Nazis when he was a child. How does it look when you look at the infiltration of the United States and eventually the infiltration of the military and the defunding of the police? And they're also they're starting to talk about defunding the military as well. So at what point, when they've weakened our numbers, our military strength is actually pretty strong right now, but once they've weakened the numbers in the police and the cities, and crime skyrockets, we are heading towards almost a posse comitatus situation they're about to put us into. In your mind, what does that look like?
Really, if I had to put this into a really good allegory, because I could, no matter what 3 points I cover, I could easily skim over 9 other points that were equally as valid and as important. But really, a great analogy for this would be, we have borders on our ship. We have people sneaking aboard and fighting their way onto our vessel. Part of our vessel right now is under enemy control. They have the forecastle. They have the engine room. We may still have the bridge and CIC, but they've got half the ship and most of the P-ways, okay? And there are some good people, sailors, service members, Americans, who are compartmentalized and locked down inside of their compartments, trying to keep their purchase on certain parts of the ship to make sure, we don't completely lose our vessel here. But it's starting to get to that point. And to just briefly kind of go in another direction, what's really played on my mind for the longest time is if the red flag law ever comes to Texas, Alex will be the very first test case.
Mm-hmm.
They will come after him with such vitriol. You would swear for the very first time in your life you would see demonic possession in these people. I mean, the type of criminal energy that they are possessed with, to borrow one of Alex's phrases, has never been seen before in living history. If they get the red flag law passed in Texas, they will disassemble Alex like Aslan.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a very good analogy. Both of those analogies.
When you're that given to a dark lord like that, for what I typically say of people who are like that, they worship the dark lord. I often don't even refer to God as Jesus or Christ. I refer to him as our creator because, I'm sure a lot of people that refer to God are all referring to the same entity, but not using the same name. And for many people like whom you're referring to, yeah, my motto is they worship the Dark Lord. Yeah, sometimes not even intentionally, whether they know it or not.
This generation, it's heartbreaking to look and see so many out there that have bought this narrative.
They're stunted. They're mentally stunted. Personally, my own child was vaccinated against my consent from his mother, and it changed him. It changed him at a very young age that was palpable. And what has been pumped into a lot of these younger people, either chemically, either through suggestion, through, television, electromagnetic representation, however you want to size it up, it's like these people are stunted. I've tried to help a lot of individuals who are younger than the age of 25, and it's like all forms of strength is lost on them. It's like they have no skills, no desire, no ambition, no motivation. They expect mostly everything to be handed to them, and they're just a completely lost generation. They have no purpose. They have no guidance. I mean, I served with people who weren't even alive during the crashing or the bombing or whatever that you want to say of the World Trade Centers.
Yeah.
There's just something wrong, something missing with this younger generation. Your generation, my generation, I imagine you're a couple years older than me. We weren't as good and as stalwart as our parents and as good of Americans because some of the things that they were taught were lost on us due to basically the softening of society. The things became too civil. People lost their ability to skin a buck, run a trot line, clean their rifle, etc., etc. Kids today, I mean, their vision is probably going to be monumentally damaged from so much screen time at such a young age. Going back just a few years ago, 5 years ago, you would say, oh my God, what does a 13-year-old girl need with a cell phone? Now it's like your 13-year-old girl doesn't have a cell phone.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's spiraling from there.
Yeah. Yeah, it has to be doing something to parts of the brain.
Affecting aptitude. It has to be affecting.
I've likened it to the stages of an insect's life, the larva, pupa to adult stage, and they're just stuck in pupa stage.
Mm-hmm. They are stunted by it.
What we've gradually done is become more and more detached from our nuclear family.
Mm-hmm.
And so the numbers on millennials in daycare, and some of these daycares, they'd spend anywhere from 6 hours to some kids would spend up to 15 hours a day, 5 days a week in these daycares. And so I think what happened was we created this generation that not only was distracted by the technology, and also distracted once they got to college by their Marxist professors.
Oh my God!
And the Marxism that's subliminally and subtly, shown to them on television and through the leftist news. But they've grown to have this feeling of neglect. So whenever they see anybody that represents mommy and daddy, I think ultimately, then that drives them insane. So Donald Trump is the ultimate daddy that they all hate. And it's not they don't even know what they're fighting about. It's all this subliminal, because once you get down there and you get into a protest and you start facing off with these people and you think you're going to go down there and have a debate with somebody over an issue, you're not. They don't have any. They're yelling at you because of your skin. That are yelling at you for your own skin. It's just madness. And
that's action out of fear is what that is. Because I went to school down here in South Florida, it was very, very. It was. There wasn't a whole lot of Anglo-Saxon, Hellenic, or white people at all in my schooling area down here when I was going to school here in Broward County. To be truthfully honest, it was majority ethnicity. South Florida is pretty much owned by Hispanics, which is just fine. But when you're going to school...
Cubans mainly, right?
Mostly Cubans and Puerto Ricans, which, believe it or not, a lot of people don't know this, but Cubans and Puerto Ricans are some of the most racist people you'll ever meet.
Oh, well, living in Texas, that also goes for Mexicans, too. But it's just part of their culture, and also, like, you go to Mississippi... You drive through Mississippi, you're going to, as a white person, you're going to face the same level of racism that black people complain about white people, Yeah.
You see, unfortunately, a lot of people like to attribute one type of behavior to an entire walk of people, when the reality is that there are black people out there who are college-educated, professor-level, real geniuses of hard science, things like chemistry and astrophysics and stuff like that. And then you have white folks who are equally as educated and as astute. But then of all other walks of life, you also have your trailer trash, your white trash, and you got all of these dregs of society. And some walks of life just have more than others. In my personal opinion, it would seem like what Stephen Molyneux would say is that some walks of life are more evolved than others because, well, nature made them more apt or more astute or whatever have you. But in my personal opinion, and I've been in a lot of fights, I mean more fights than I can count, I've never fought a white person once in my entire life. I've never initiated a fight, but I've been in more fights than I can count. And every time that someone's ever assaulted me, it's been from behind, by surprise, with them screaming some insanity like, I heard you's a racist. I heard you's a racist. Right. And you're just getting assaulted with no real evidence of the fact. These are people that are insecure. They just want to take their hate and their insecurity and their vitriol out on someone else. Skin color doesn't really have anything to do with it. Like you said, it has to do with daddy and mommy figures and people that basically are capable of standing up on their own 2 feet and don't need to lean on anything. And when people see something strong and capable that has fortitude, that can stand on its own 2 feet, their first instinct is to lose their mind and tear it down because they can't relate to that.
130,000 in the Civil War killed. And the thing about our original Civil War was at least it was organized. I mean, I grew up mostly in Kentucky, and you would hear the stories about how the cousins they'd have to fight, later on that afternoon, but they'd all eat lunch together before they did that, and then they'd each go to their sides and they get fixed bayonets, and
they were tougher Americans than we are.
Oh, far more, and more educated too.
They were very worldly people back then.
People can barely string a sentence together anymore. I mean, it's amazing.
It's true.
The lexicon that people had 100 years ago would just blow anyone away today. And just an average person. The Civil War that we had in the 19th century was organized. It was, from a military standpoint, it was. There were
definitive.
It was definitive, but it was also, it wasn't a guerrilla style like the Revolutionary War. It was made.
There was a line drawn in the sand.
Mm-hmm. But a civil war in this country just sounds like complete and total chaos under this situation. There might be a band of 10 angry BLM members, and they're attacking a band of, patriots, which have been labeled as white supremacists and racists, but they're just patriots. And this is something, early in InfoWars that we were always against, especially with Obama and Bush, we were worried that, the military would intervene too much into our lives and onto the streets and start arresting people. But now the tables have completely turned, and it's as if law enforcement is just backing off. The court systems are protecting these people. We're reaching a point where you're right, it's DEFCON 1, and it's going to, if we continue down this road, it's just going to turn into skirmish upon skirmish upon skirmish.
And that's exactly it. If there ever is a civil war in this country, it will never be something that is declared out in the open, full-on pitched battle. It has to be something that is surreptitious and clandestine. It has to be something that is skirmish after skirmish after skirmish, because in the modern world, especially with how interconnected we all are, as soon as anything is declared out in the open and there to basically be debated, most people, oftentimes cooler heads prevail, which is why you really probably wouldn't see something like a whole regiment of armed black militia individuals face off against another party of individuals of any skin color. If that ever were to happen, it would be something that happened in the middle of the night when one side called the other side to arms because of a situation that was precipitated most likely by a governmental or statutory power, basically. Mm-hmm. If something like this ever kicked off, it would be because of a false flag kind of event like George Floyd being killed by some white cop who really most likely had a grudge with that guy, and it had nothing to do with official law enforcement reasoning whatsoever. And really, the thing to keep in mind here the most is that if we do have a civil war, just like the last one, it will be in some dimension about skin color. And the line may divide down the center by skin color. But the thing is, though, is that being American is a state of mind.
Oh, yeah.
I have served with people who were 100% Asian in their genetics, but they were born here. They never spoke a lick of Mandarin, and they had a state of mind that was as American as the blondest-haired, blue-eyed surfer from California, okay? And it is those type of people, those conservative, well-rounded, disciplined individuals who are going to side on the side of the Constitution and the side of the country that has to do with preserving the American way of life, versus people who prescribe to the placeholder puppet ventriloquist doll Joe Biden, where they're basically trying to redefine what it is to be American through their judicial system or whatever else have you. And I'm telling you, it's not going to happen. And this is what I was arguing to someone else the other day. Let's say, just wild scenario here, let's just say that all of the POCs in the country, all the people of color, decided to go around and in a genocidal fashion kill absolutely every single white person they could, okay? They would only get so far, most likely, before there would be a retribution from the other side of the aisle, let's just say the white folk, whatever, before those people...
Well, I think the irony is that even if they do start... I mean, they just killed that young mother.
Oh, yeah, I know.
You know, I mean, that's a good example. You know, she said all lives matter, which is Martin Luther King's message, and they just shot her in the head. The irony is and they're already, you're hearing it day after day now. You see on Twitter, you see the videos of people saying white people must be killed. There's professors, black professors, saying that white people are going to have to be killed. But the irony is that if they do start going after white people, and there is a movement to finally stand up and say there's been enough, the irony is that movement of people is going to be so diverse of Americans. Like you said, it's not just going to be white people.
No, it's not.
It's not going to be a bunch of racist white people with sheets on their heads. It's going to be America. And America is so diverse, and it is a state of mind.
And as a matter of fact, let me try and get this off the tip of my tongue while I can still remember. It may start off with a racial facet if there is a real pitched battle, civil war in our country to where our night skies are lit up only by fires and not streetlights anymore. It may start with a racial facet, but when it ends or towards the end during the last 10% of that battle to be waged, it will be a communist versus patriot battle is what it will be. And maybe that other side of the aisle, that other opposing force, may be all primarily one color. Probably won't be. There'll be a lot of white people trying to, help the BLM individuals and the Soros individuals and the Antifa individuals. And Antifa and BLM will pretty much conglomerate into one command structure. But when we get towards the end, when we push these people back into the ocean like the Spartans of old, it will be better illustrated that it was a American and an Americana state of mind and force, fighting force, versus a communist insurgent force that has crept into our country over the last 20 years or so, is how it would really end.
Yeah, the terminology, the sleeping giant, most people against that sleeping giant probably fantasize that sleeping giant is this gigantic white, Republican, racist monolith.
No.
And the sleeping giant is actually, it represents so many different people, so many different cultures, but ultimately the American culture that they've forgotten. They want us to forget as well. They want to bring in this communist style power structure. And it's amazing that we're reaching 2021. If something isn't done soon, we're going to reach a complete breaking point, especially after the Democrats in cities like New York with de Blasio, with what he's done to defund the police, and AOC out there representing the Bronx and not doing anything about it, and Pelosi representing San Francisco and not doing anything about it, and the Portland mayor and the Seattle mayor, and it's eventually, with CHOP, how within 9 days 4 people were shot. That's just a microcosm of where we're headed.
Oh, that's just a little sample. That's a little taste on a toothpick.
That's an appetizer. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's going to spiral out of control.
I have 2 outcomes in my mind, and I've been playing with this for a while. And what this is that, let's just say, for instance, if the country devolves and separates itself right down the middle, and we have this conflict with one another, no matter which side wins, people like, let's just say, for instance, George Soros and his acolytes, the globalists, the politicians, the people that are sowing this division, they will win if we fight against each other, no matter who wins.
Right.
Let's say it's a purely racial, right down the middle, black versus white or darker versus lighter skin color war. If every black person in the country kills every white person, George Soros wins. The entire world devolves into a third world country. Right. The only people who have power are people who were born into it, and everything turns back into the medieval times. Now, they win if that happens, but on the other side of that, let's say, we completely scrub America clean and it turns back into, the 1920s or the 1950s. They still win because America will then be perceived as some kind of Nazi totalitarian state that China needs to come and topple over. We need to get along with each other, irregardless of whether we're all living shoulder to shoulder with each other or in our own respective countries. Because if we can't work out our problems, this will be the great filter.
George Garbis, thank you for joining me, man. And you really hit the nail on the head. And I'd like to have you on again. And thanks again for coming on.
I appreciate you so much for your time, sir. You've been too thoughtful and too kind.
Thanks again, George. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, sir.
Take
Over
care.
now.
Thanks again for listening to JonBownePolitix. You can find us at Newsbound and JonBownePolitix on Twitter, at JonBowneReports and JonBownePolitix on YouTube, band.video, and our home base at Daily News Collective, The Poor Man's Drudge Report, thanks to HC Universal Network. Good night, America, wherever you are.